Off the coast of Georgia, beneath the dark water and the soft mud of a quiet sound near Savannah, there may still be a nuclear bomb. It has been there since 1958. Search teams looked for it. They never found it. And to this day, the United States government cannot tell you with certainty exactly where it is. A real weapon, built for war, dropped by accident and simply lost. Still down there, somewhere, in the silt and the cold and the dark. That bomb is not a myth. It is not a legend. It is one entry on a list. An official list kept by the United States military of the times it lost control of its own nuclear weapons. There were crashes, there were collisions, there were bombs that fell on foreign villages, bombs that burned on the ice, and bombs that came within a single switch of detonating over American soil. Inside the military, there was a quiet name for this kind of nightmare. Not panic, not catastrophe, not apocalypse. Just two calm, almost gentle words. Broken Arrow. This is the story of America's lost nuclear bombs. The ones that were recovered, the ones that were never found, and the handful of terrifying moments when the most powerful weapons ever built came far closer to going off by accident than the public was ever meant to know. To understand how a country could possibly lose a nuclear bomb, and then lose another, and then another, you have to understand the strange and frightening logic of the time it happened. This was the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union each held enough nuclear weapons to erase the other from the map, and the entire balance between them rested on a single grim idea: deterrence. The promise that if one side ever struck first, the other side would survive long enough to strike back and destroy them in return. Mutual destruction was the thing keeping the peace. But that promise only worked if it was always ready. The retaliation had to be guaranteed, instant, unstoppable. And in the years before missiles could be launched in minutes from underground silos and submarines, America's nuclear punch was carried almost entirely by airplanes, by bombers. So the United States Air Force did something that sounds almost insane today. Under a program called Chrome Dome, Strategic Air Command kept fleets of B-52 bombers in the air at all times, 24 hours a day, loaded with live thermonuclear weapons, flying enormous looping routes toward the edge of Soviet airspace and back. The idea was simple and chilling. If the Soviets ever launched a surprise attack and destroyed the bases on the ground, it would not matter, because there would already be armed American bombers in the sky, airborne and untouchable, ready to fly onto their targets. For years, those planes never stopped flying. Day and night, in every kind of weather, real hydrogen bombs rode through the sky aboard aging aircraft, refueling in midair, crossing oceans, landing, and taking off again. Each one of those weapons was more powerful than everything dropped in all of the Second World War combined. And every single flight, every takeoff, every midair refueling, every mechanical part that could wear out or fail added one more chance for something to go horribly wrong. The system was built by people, maintained by people, flown by people. And people, no matter how well trained, make mistakes. Engines fail, metal cracks, fuel leaks. Two aircraft drift a few feet too close in the dark. The miracle is not that America lost some of its nuclear weapons. The miracle, when you understand how often those bombs were in the air, is that it did not lose far more. The Department of Defense has officially acknowledged at least 32 broken arrow incidents between 1950 and 1980. At least 6 American nuclear weapons were lost in those years and never recovered. 6. Still missing. Our journey through them begins on a winter night over Georgia. It was the early hours of February 5, 1958. A B-47 bomber was flying a simulated combat mission out of Florida, carrying a Mark 15 hydrogen bomb, a weapon weighing more than 7,000 pounds. Somewhere in the dark sky near Savannah, another aircraft, An F-86 fighter jet on a training flight failed to see the bomber in time. The two planes collided in mid-air. The fighter pilot ejected and survived as his aircraft tumbled away. But the bomber was badly damaged. One engine was crippled. The plane was shaking, struggling to stay in the air, and the crew now faced an impossible decision. They tried 3 times to bring the wounded bomber down to land at Hunter Air Force Base. 3 times the aircraft could not slow down safely with the heavy bomb still aboard. And every attempted landing carried a horrifying risk. If they crashed on the runway, the conventional explosives inside that weapon could go off and tear the base apart. So the order came down: get rid of it and drop the bomb into the sea where it could do no harm. Flying over a shallow stretch of water called Wassaw Sound, near a place named Tybee Island, the crew released the weapon from around 7,000 feet. They watched it fall into the dark water below. There was no explosion. The crew brought their crippled bomber safely back to base. And then they went looking for the bomb. The Navy and the Air Force searched the waters of Wassaw Sound for weeks, dragging the bottom and sweeping the mud. They found nothing. The water was murky, the bottom was soft, and the weapon had vanished into the silt. Eventually, the search was called off. The bomb was quietly written off as irretrievably lost. It is still there. Now, there has been decades of argument over exactly how dangerous that lost bomb really is, and it centers on one question. Did it contain its nuclear core? The Air Force has long maintained that the weapon was carrying a dummy capsule that night, that the live nuclear core was never installed, and that a nuclear explosion was therefore never possible. Later testimony and conflicting records muddied the picture and kept the debate alive for years. But the most grounded version of the truth is this: the bomb was real. It held conventional explosives and uranium. The Air Force says the part needed for a nuclear blast was not aboard, and whatever its exact contents, it was never recovered, and it sits to this day somewhere off the Georgia coast. A missing bomb is a frightening thing, but a missing bomb is not the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing is a bomb that almost goes off. For that, we travel north and forward 3 years to a tobacco field in North Carolina, and to the single most dangerous nuclear accident in American history. It was just after midnight on January 24, 1961. A B-52 bomber was on a Chrome Dome alert mission, circling over North Carolina, carrying 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs. Each of those weapons had a yield of around 3.8 megatons. To put that in human terms, each bomb was something like 250 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. There were 2 of them aboard that single aircraft. During the flight, the crew discovered a fuel leak in the right wing. The leak grew worse. The fuel poured out, the aircraft grew unstable, and then, catastrophically, the right wing failed entirely. The B-52 began to break apart in the air at around 9,000 feet. The order was given to bail out. Of the 8 men aboard, 5 managed to escape the spinning, disintegrating aircraft. 3 did not survive. And as the bomber tore itself apart, the 2 hydrogen bombs fell free. This is where the story stops being about a crash and becomes something far more frightening. Because one of those bombs did not simply fall. It behaved almost exactly as it was designed to behave during a real nuclear attack. As the aircraft ripped apart, the violent motion did something no one intended. It mimicked the deliberate actions a crew would take to drop a bomb on an enemy. The weapon's parachute deployed just as it would in a genuine attack, slowing its descent so it could detonate at the optimum height. Inside the falling bomb, its arming sequence began to run. Switches flipped, timers started, sensors triggered. Step after step in the chain that leads to a nuclear explosion clicked into place, one after another, as the weapon drifted down toward the sleeping farmland below. And when it struck the ground, the bomb sent a firing signal. The same signal it would send in the instant before a detonation. Later, a nuclear safety engineer at Sandia National Laboratories named Parker Jones studied what had happened that night. His analysis stayed classified for decades until it was pried loose through a Freedom of Information request and finally made public in 2013. In it, Jones wrote a sentence that has haunted people ever since. He concluded that one simple, low-voltage switch stood between the United States and a major catastrophe. One switch. One cheap, ordinary switch had stayed in the safe position when nearly everything else in the arming sequence had run. If that final switch had failed like the others, a multi-megaton hydrogen bomb would have detonated in North Carolina. The fallout from a blast that size could have spread toward Washington, toward Baltimore, toward Philadelphia, and New York. The history of the entire East Coast could have been rewritten in fire and radiation in a single night, not by an enemy, but by an American bomber falling out of an American sky. It is fair to say that nuclear experts still argue over exactly how close it truly came. Some maintain that other safeguards would still have prevented a full nuclear yield, that the situation, while grave, was not quite as knife-edge as that one switch suggests. But almost no one disputes the larger and more unsettling conclusion that Parker Jones reached. The weapons of that era did not have adequate safety for the job they were being asked to do. The danger was not imaginary. It was built into the technology itself. And the second bomb from that crash told its own quieter, stranger story. It came down without a working parachute, slammed into a muddy field at tremendous speed, and buried itself deep in the wet earth. Crews dug and dug, recovering pieces of it. But part of that weapon, a core component of its thermonuclear stage, was buried so deep in the waterlogged ground that it was never fully recovered. In the end, the government simply bought the rights to the land and left it there. To this day, a piece of a hydrogen bomb lies somewhere beneath a North Carolina field with crops growing over it. In Georgia, a bomb had vanished. In North Carolina, a bomb had nearly armed itself. But in both cases, the danger had stayed on American soil, an American problem, hidden from the public but contained within the country's own borders. That was about to change. Because the next time, America's nuclear accident would fall out of the sky and land in someone else's country. On January 17, 1966, high over the southeastern coast of Spain, a B-52 bomber was carrying out a routine mid-air refueling. It was connected to a KC-135 tanker aircraft, taking on fuel at around 31,000 feet. The kind of delicate aerial ballet that happened thousands of times across the Chrome Dome program. The bomber was carrying 4 hydrogen bombs. Something went wrong in the join. The two aircraft collided. The tanker, full of fuel, erupted into an enormous fireball, and both planes were destroyed. Of the 11 men aboard the 2 aircraft, 7 were killed. And as the burning wreckage rained down toward the quiet farming village of Palomares below, 4 thermonuclear bombs fell with it. A villager looked up and saw a giant ball of fire falling through the sky, the planes breaking into pieces above their homes. 3 of the 4 bombs came down on land. One of them landed almost gently, its parachute deploying perfectly, and was found nearly intact, a silent testimony to the engineers who built its safety systems. But the other 2 were not so lucky. When they hit the ground, the conventional high explosives packed inside them detonated. There was no nuclear explosion. The safety systems held in that crucial sense, but the blasts tore the weapons open and scattered their contents across the fields, spreading plutonium contamination over the farmland around the village. An invisible danger now lay across the soil where people grew their tomatoes and grazed their animals. And the 4th bomb was simply gone. It had fallen not on land, but into the Mediterranean Sea, sinking somewhere off the coast. What followed was one of the largest and most desperate underwater searches in history. The Navy poured in thousands of personnel, ships, and deep-diving submersibles, scouring the seabed for a single lost hydrogen bomb. The breakthrough came partly thanks to a local fisherman who had watched the bomb fall and could point the searchers toward the right stretch of water. After roughly 2.5 months, the weapon was finally located and lifted from the depths, intact. The cleanup on land was its own massive operation. Around 1,400 tons of contaminated soil and vegetation were dug up, sealed into barrels, and shipped all the way back to the United States for storage. But the political damage could not be shipped away so easily. A nuclear accident had contaminated the soil of an allied nation. The Spanish public was frightened. The world was watching. To calm the panic, the United States ambassador to Spain and a senior Spanish official did something almost theatrical. In front of the cameras, the two men walked into the sea at a Palomares beach and went swimming, smiling for the photographers, trying to show the world that the water was safe and there was nothing to fear. It was one of the strangest images of the entire Cold War. Diplomats in their swimsuits, performing reassurance, while behind them barrels of radioactive Spanish earth were being loaded for shipment to America. And the contamination did not simply vanish with the photo opportunity. Spain has pushed for further cleanup of the area for decades since. Palomares showed how a single accident could spiral into an international crisis. But the Cold War's airborne alert had one more disaster left to give. And fittingly, for a story like this one, it happened on the ice. If you have followed this channel, you already know that Greenland was hiding an American nuclear secret beneath its surface. A buried city, a plan to hide hundreds of missiles in the ice. Greenland was already woven deep into America's nuclear story. And then, on January 21st, 1968, the sky over Greenland gave it one more chapter. A B-52 bomber, flying out of an airbase in New York, was on a Chrome Dome alert mission over the Arctic, carrying 4 hydrogen bombs. It was patrolling the frozen edge of the world near Thule Air Base in Greenland, a region administered by Denmark. Then, about 6 hours into the flight, a fire broke out in the crew compartment. Smoke filled the cabin. The fire spread, and it could not be controlled. The pilot turned desperately toward Thule, hoping to make an emergency landing, but there was no time. The crew was forced to abandon the aircraft. 7 men were aboard. 6 of them ejected and parachuted down into the brutal Arctic cold, surviving. The 7th, who did not have an ejection seat, was killed trying to bail out. The empty bomber flew on without them, turned, and slammed into the sea ice of North Star Bay, several miles from the base, skidding across the ice in flames before it exploded. The conventional explosives in all 4 hydrogen bombs detonated on impact. Once again, the safety systems prevented any nuclear blast, but the explosions ripped the weapons apart and scattered their radioactive guts across the frozen bay. Plutonium, uranium, and other contaminants were thrown across the ice and into the blackened snow, smeared across miles of one of the most remote places on Earth. What came next was an operation called Project Crested Ice, and it was punishing beyond description. Crews had to clean up scattered radioactive debris in the depths of an Arctic winter, in near total darkness, in temperatures that could plunge far below zero, with winds that screamed across the open ice. For months, thousands of American and Danish workers scraped up contaminated snow and ice and twisted wreckage, packing it into containers to be hauled away. They removed hundreds of thousands of gallons of contaminated material before they were done. But there was a problem they could not scrape away. When the military first announced the accident, it claimed that all 4 bombs had been destroyed in the crash. Within weeks, investigators quietly realized that was not quite true. They could account for the remains of only 3 of the 4 weapons. The secondary stage of the 4th bomb, a critical and highly classified component, could not be found anywhere in the wreckage on the ice. That summer, the United States quietly sent a small submarine down into the dark waters beneath the bay to search the seabed for the missing piece. Whether it was ever truly recovered remains a matter of dispute to this day. The fallout from Thule was not only radioactive, it was political. Denmark had a strict policy against nuclear weapons on its territory, and Greenland was Danish land. The crash revealed that American bombers had been flying armed with hydrogen bombs over Greenland all along, in direct conflict with that policy, and the revelation caused a lasting scandal. Years later, Danish cleanup workers would come forward with illnesses they blamed on the radiation they were exposed to during that frozen, hurried operation. And Thule was the final straw. The accident made something undeniable that should have been obvious for years. Flying live hydrogen bombs around the clock on aging aircraft in all conditions was a risk that no amount of crew training could ever fully tame. Almost immediately after the Thule crash, the United States ended the Chrome Dome airborne alert program. The bombers stopped flying their endless armed loops. The sky, at last, grew a little safer. Tybee, Goldsboro, Palomares, and Thule are the headline disasters. But they were not alone. They were the most dramatic points on a much longer list. In 1950, a bomber jettisoned a nuclear weapon over the wilderness of British Columbia before crashing, in what is often called the first lost weapon of its kind. In 1956, a bomber carrying nuclear components vanished entirely over the Mediterranean Sea and was never found. The plane and crew were gone without a trace. In 1965, a Navy aircraft loaded with a nuclear weapon rolled off the deck elevator of an aircraft carrier and slid into the Pacific Ocean. The plane, the pilot, and the bomb sank into water miles deep and were never recovered. Each of these was its own quiet emergency. Each one another weapon lost or another disaster narrowly avoided. Each one another reminder that the system designed to protect America was constantly, by its very nature, putting America at risk. Which leaves the question that every one of these stories raises. If these bombs were dropped, crashed, burned, and blown apart, why did none of them ever produce a nuclear explosion? The answer is the thin and crucial line that separates a broken arrow from the end of a city. A nuclear weapon is not like an ordinary bomb that simply explodes when it hits the ground hard enough. It is an extraordinarily complex machine, and to produce its full and terrible yield, a precise chain of events must happen in exactly the right order. Conventional explosives must fire in perfect symmetry. Electrical systems must charge. Arming switches must close. Firing signals must reach their target at the right instant. The weapons were deliberately designed so that an accident, a fire, an impact, a crash would break that chain somewhere along its length and stop the sequence cold. But in those early Cold War years, those safety features were far cruder than they later became. The chain was not as hard to complete by accident as it should have been. Goldsboro proved that. The whole point of the safety systems was to never be tested for real, and again by accident, they were tested for real, sometimes by a single switch. In the years that followed these disasters, that hard lesson drove a quiet revolution in how nuclear weapons were built. Engineers developed far stronger safeguards, coded locks that required secret authorization before a weapon could ever arm, sensors that would only allow a bomb to ready itself if it detected the exact conditions of a genuine mission, the real forces of a real launch or a real fall from altitude, designs that guaranteed the conventional explosives could not trigger a nuclear yield no matter how they were set off by accident. The weapons America carries today are vastly safer than the ones that fell on Georgia and North Carolina and Spain and Greenland. They were made that way because those accidents showed, in the most frightening way possible, exactly what could go wrong. So in the end, what does the story of the broken arrows really tell us? It is tempting to call it a story about carelessness, about a military that was reckless with the most dangerous objects ever made. But that misses the deeper and more uncomfortable truth. The United States built this system precisely because it was trying to prevent a nuclear war. The bombers flew around the clock so that no enemy would ever believe a surprise attack could succeed. The whole terrifying apparatus existed in the name of safety, in the name of peace, through the certainty of retaliation. And yet keeping that apparatus ready, every hour of every day for years on end, meant flying and fueling and handling weapons of unimaginable power so constantly that accidents became not a possibility, but a certainty. The very effort to prevent catastrophe kept manufacturing the conditions for it. The bombs that fell never detonated. No American city was lost. No accidental war began. By the cold arithmetic of the era, the system worked. But it worked with a margin so thin that, on at least one winter night in North Carolina, the difference between an ordinary morning and the worst disaster in the nation's history came down to a single switch the size of a light fixture. Most of these weapons were recovered. a few never were. Somewhere off the coast of Georgia, beneath the mud and the dark water, a bomb from 1958 is very likely still resting where it fell. Beneath a quiet field in North Carolina, a buried fragment of a hydrogen bomb lies under growing crops. And in the cold archives of the Department of Defense, the list of broken arrows sits as a permanent reminder that for decades, the line between deterrence and disaster was thinner than almost anyone alive at the time was ever allowed to know. If stories like this one keep you up at night in the best possible way, the true ones, the buried ones, the secrets that were real all along, then consider subscribing and staying with us here at American Whispers. History is full of things that were hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to go looking. The bombs that did not explode still changed the world, and a few of them are still out there, lying in the dark, waiting, the way they have waited all along.